So, good afternoon. As president of the University of Chicago, it's my great privilege to introduce today our very special guest, Bill Gates. As you very well know, we can say some things about Bill Gates that you can say about very few people in the world. Mostly good. Bill Gates' work throughout his life has fundamentally altered the way the world works. Microsoft's technologies innovations affect each of our lives on a daily and, for some of us, virtually constant basis, and the positive impact that personal computing has had on the world is broad, deep, and of course, still very much evolving. Estimates are that there are more than a billion PCs in use worldwide, with the expectation that this number will double over the next 5 years. Bill Gates has long envisioned and articulated a world in which everyone could access a computer and what the implications of this would be. And it is this sort of global thinking that has fueled much of the work in which he is involved today. 2 years ago, Bill left Microsoft to focus his obviously very considerable energy, efforts, and entrepreneurial spirit on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of which he is the co-chair, and which is the largest transparently operated private foundation in the world. The foundation is primarily focused on enhancing global access to health care, reducing extreme poverty, and expanding educational opportunities in the United States. And it is on behalf of the Gates Foundation that Bill Gates is here today. The Gates Foundation has, since its inception in 1994, made a profound impact on its key foci areas. It has committed over $22.5 billion in grants in over 100 countries around the world. The foundation has worked to combat the spread of disease and infection worldwide, has focused significant resources and attention to combating malaria, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and vaccine-preventable diseases. 213 million children have been immunized as a result of these efforts, and millions of lives have been saved. Similar efforts have been focused toward the world's poor, from training and financial services to agricultural development to the provision of free computing through libraries. The foundation has paid unwavering attention to the 2.5 billion people worldwide who live on less than $2 a day. It is to these issues and many more like them that Bill Gates has committed himself. Bill is here today as part of a 5-university tour. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome again to the campus of the University of Chicago, Bill Gates.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm very excited to be here today. I've got some fun thoughts to share, and mostly we'll spend the time on whatever questions you have. When I dropped out of college, which was some time ago, I did tell my dad I'd go back to college. So I kind of do it one day at a time to work off this promise that I made to him. This is the first college tour I've done since being full-time working on the foundation. And I've really been enjoying the work a lot. As was mentioned, it's about diseases of the poor, it's about education, it's about backing people with new ideas, biological breakthroughs, social scientists, and we're making a lot of progress, but there's still so much to do. And so differently than what I would have talked about in my Microsoft tours, which was focused on the wonders of technology, today I want to focus on something else. And that is the question of whether the brightest minds are working on the most important problems. I think this is an important question, and I think if we could make it more true it would make a huge difference. Now, this is something that'll be hard to be precise and numeric about because we'd have to define all these terms. Who are the brightest minds? You never know exactly for sure. You get surprised, but certainly any reasonable definition would include the people who have a chance to be educated at the top, say, 50 universities in the world. So it would certainly include all of us here. What are these important problems? Again, you would get different definitions, but I think everyone would include a number of things. The inequities of the conditions of the poor, their health conditions where their children have a high chance of dying, their food conditions, their environmental conditions, sanitary conditions. Reducing those inequities would be among the most important problems. And then we would have some other problems. Access to a great education, which is not solved anywhere in the world, and the need for things like a new way of generating energy that's both environmentally friendly and ideally substantially lower cost than the way we do it today. So we would have a number of problems, but not a large number. I think you could pick maybe a dozen or so, and the progress we make on those would determine the improvement in the human condition almost entirely. And most of the other issues would not have nearly that kind of effect. So what we want is we want all sorts of innovation and energy, excitement, talent focused on these problems. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago when I was with a group of friends, and they were talking about two topics in a very excited way. And it was amazing how much they knew about these topics and the history, different ideas. They were disagreeing and had different thoughts. One of them was about sports. They were paying attention to the NCAA March Madness. They each had their own picks for the brackets and thoughts about different coaching techniques. And I was just blown away by the depth and the passion there. Another topic that they were very impressive on was things related to financial products, which stocks had gone up, what had gone on with credit ratings and mortgages, and basically issues around Wall Street, what the innovations were and what was going on there. Now, neither of those topics is in the world's most important problems. But that same kind of spirited engagement and thinking and knowing the history, I'd love to see on these problems. So can you imagine, a group like this talking about what's the best way to improve teachers? What's worked, what hasn't worked? Or a discussion about new seeds and how we're going to get those in order to improve the nutrition for the poorest and being able to feed the entire world in a sustainable fashion. That's the kind of thing that I'd love to see, that talent. Now, I'm not totally saying we shouldn't put some talent into sports or entertainment or investing or even innovations that primarily focus on the needs of the rich that aren't as urgent, say, on baldness drugs. After all, I don't want to get rid of these things completely. I really like movies. I do know people who would look better with baldness drugs. But perhaps if we did some shift in talent in the direction of these things, we would make more progress and we would improve the world in a significant way. Now, I think there has been some progress on this. I think the awareness of AIDS and malaria, for example, are much stronger today than ever before. And I think that's led to some involvement and some generosity over the last decade. And as you get people involved who people admire, that draws more people in. There's lots of examples from all over the world. Here at the University of Chicago, you have people like Dr. Fumi Olopede, who is a breast cancer specialist, and bringing awareness about that, not just to rich countries, but to Nigeria, where she was born, and the world at large. And when I look at somebody like Paul Farmer, who's done work in Haiti and Rwanda, and the reception he gets as he goes around and talks particularly to student groups, it's very strong. If we look at Teach for America and the number of top students applying to contribute there, it is quite impressive, and that's a new phenomenon. Here at this university, the graduating class had 178 people apply, which is 13% of the senior class. And that's quite phenomenal that they were willing to go and spend at least a number of years in an occupation that's tough and doesn't pay as well, but in terms of social importance, ranks up very, very high. If I think of my own awareness of these problems and when did I decide to learn about them and focus on them, when I was young, I wasn't thinking about the poorest countries. I didn't, in terms of picking what I wanted to do some ranking of the overall impact. When I was 13 years old, the school I was in brought in a computer. It was this mysterious object that seemed to confuse and scare most people, so it was very attractive to me. And I got very involved, very fanatical about learning how to use it and how to make it better, and writing software literally from that point forward as my almost full-time activity. And so it wasn't until much later when, as part of Microsoft's success and being a global company, I was traveling around learning a bit more about broad issues, that I had an awareness of not only the problems in the poor countries, but also the depredations even here in the United States, including in areas like education. So I wish I'd been more aware. And even though it wouldn't have been my full-time work, I could have started sooner to use my voice and think about those things. Now at the foundation, I get a chance to do that full-time, and it's very fulfilling. There's a lot of progress that's being made. And I want to take two of the big problems and talk about where we are on those to give you a sense of what challenges arise and how to think about progress. If we were going to have a report card for the world and pick just a few things to say, has it improved or not, I think one of the metrics would be childhood deaths. That is to say, as time has gone on, for each year, how many children under 5 survive, and look at that by country and see what those figures look like. If you go back a few hundred years ago, throughout the world, about 30% of children, even in the richest countries, richest families, would die before the age of 5. But that improved very dramatically in the wealthy countries, to where now you have many countries that are down to as low as 5 or 6 per 1,000. And so this is a very important topic. And it's one that I was interested in as we started the foundation, because we thought maybe there was a paradox that if we invested in improving health, wouldn't that create additional problems because it would increase population? And if you increase population, then education, food, jobs, environmental degradation, all those things are going to be tougher. And that's when I was amazed to find out that, in fact, better health leads to small families, that parents are trying to have a very high probability of having a few children to support them in old age. And so if they know that health is better, then they won't have as many children. And that's an effect that's very powerful and has been seen throughout the world. And so that was very empowering for me. It meant you could work on health, and actually it was a very profound intervention, not just to save lives in the near term, but also to reduce the population growth that would be creating those other problems and making them almost impossible to solve. So I went out to find about these diseases, and I was amazed to find that there were a few diseases that account for a lot of these deaths. It was a very shocking thing. One way to think about the comparison that comes through to me in a fairly powerful way is to think of all the people who were born the same year you were and say, okay, how long until 20% of those people born your year have died? In a very poor country, by the time you reach the age of 4, 20% will have died. In a country like the United States, you get past the age of 60 before that takes place. So you can see a pretty dramatic difference there. Now this chart you're looking at, which is the only one I'll be showing you today, is really my favorite chart, because although it shows that presently, in the last year it was measured, which is actually 2008, we had gotten down to below 9 million. Even that's pretty tragic. But the trend is quite phenomenal. That is, back in 1960, when there were 40% less children born, over 20 million died. And so it comes down fairly steadily to the below 9 million. And there's every reason to think that with new vaccines, getting those out, those are the primary explanation for this. Some increase in wealth helps because that drives nutrition and living conditions. But the biggest factor, the majority of this, is about vaccines, and vaccines that are fairly inexpensive. Just measles and smallpox alone are over 3 million of this drop, are just two diseases and the vaccines related to those. Smallpox, of course, was completely eliminated in this time frame, and measles is down over 95% from what it was back in 1960. And so we can make progress with very small amount of resources. And this is what was so stunning, is how little was being put into the remaining diseases, respiratory diseases like pneumonia, diarrheal diseases like cholera, one called rotavirus that was the one that my wife Melinda and I read about, and just couldn't believe that there was almost no work going on to get a vaccine out to poor countries on, because that disease alone kills over 500,000. And you'd think society would put a lot of resources into that, or malaria that kills over 1 million, but in fact almost no resources were being put into that. So there's, in this area of childhood deaths, some things we know to go after, particular diseases. There's parts of it, particularly the deaths in the first 30 days, that aren't as well understood. And again, that's where the number of bright people who've really dug into that and gathered the data is stunningly low. It hasn't gotten 1/100th of the attention that it deserves. But I am optimistic that we'll get these vaccines, we'll improve the way we'll deliver them. One of the people who talks about global health, who's very articulate, particularly on this issue of how it brings population down, is Hans Rosling. And he's out on the web. He gave a TED Talk in 2006 that was very good. There's a picture of him. And he has a lot of ways that he articulates these challenges of world health in a very straightforward way. It's clear that once you improve health and invest in a few other things, including female literacy, that a country can escape the poverty trap, that it can get out and not just be a recipient of aid, but actually contribute. Even in this generation, South Korea has gone from being a recipient of aid to now quite a generous donor. And that's a country without any particular advantages. It's just once aid helped it get to a point, it was self-sufficient, it had good governance, it took off from there. So that's one of the problems. The other one I want to talk about briefly is education. And as I said, this is kind of a global challenge. You'd think, well, this is the United States, we're the richest country, so we must be very on top of this, setting an example for other countries. And in fact, you're probably aware that is, in fact, not the case. There's high schools within a few miles of here you could go and visit to have that brought home in a pretty dramatic way. In high schools, the dropout rates are over 30%. For minorities, they're over 50%. And even if you graduate, a lot of those people who graduate haven't been educated very well, so they'll sign up for college, be put into a remedial course, and if that happens to you, over 50% of those students never finish. They drop out in college and don't end up with that degree, even though they put time and money into that. Also, we face the problem that the expense of education is going up faster than anything except healthcare, and so it's more and more out of reach. And particularly as we look at government budgets and the demands made on them, particularly of healthcare, but also government pension and other things, the portion that's going to education has been reduced, and that's going to continue because that medical cost thing is just gets stronger and stronger, and the age structure of the population works against you very strongly on that. So this is a huge problem. Unless we can take the system and help those teachers be better, we won't have the engine of equity and the engine of progress that we've had in the U.S. education system. Things were improving up through about 1975, and then ironically, the number of adults was increased more rapidly, and the pay relative to the average was increased very rapidly, but that's when the achievement plateaued off and, on a relative basis, fell behind virtually all the other rich countries. So I think there's two things here to be optimistic about. That paints a pretty bleak story. One is that by finding out what good teachers do well, really getting serious about that, which not many bright people have worked on that problem, and then figuring out how to transfer those skills, that would have a dramatic effect. Now, the reward measurement system might have to change to facilitate that, but if all we had was that if teachers were as good as the top quartile, our education system would be by far the best in the world. The dropout problem would be solved. So that's all you need to do. And today there's no effort made to really transfer those capabilities. So you're starting with that as an advantage. Another thing here is that technology will come in and make a difference. The ability to take the best teacher, whether it's in high school or college, and have them online. So the world's best lectures, not just the one at the university you happen to go to, but free to everyone in the world. And not just the lectures, although that's an important part. All the interactive demonstrations and ability to test your skills, see if you understood the concepts. And at some point, even accreditation that's independent of where you went to school can accredit your learning in a way that, say, would even be stronger than a diploma from a particular university. These elements can be unbundled and innovated in through technology. Now, we're just at the beginning of this. Some universities are putting up their best lectures online. Academic Earth pulls a lot of those together. Here you've got people like Sidney Nagel, who does a physics at the breakfast table thing that's up and available. I've gone online and taken lots of courses to get the right background for my foundation work. That's worked out very well. So there's clearly an area where we need to draw a lot more minds into it. And, other problems, sanitation, problems like how do you get good governance. There are more than just these two problems, but I think they're good examples where the relative focus of smart ideas, of experimentation, needs to be increased fairly dramatically, and somehow that's not being pulled together. So it does raise almost a meta question of how do you get the brightest people more focused on these big problems? Why doesn't that happen naturally? The financial rewards aren't totally lined up with it. That's certainly one issue. But perhaps by using the ability to raise awareness, sharing success stories, getting those out more, drawing people in and showing that even though at first when you learn these areas, you're kind of set back by how daunting it is, that you can see there are things that can be done. And so, I'd love to have lots of people thinking about not only this specifics, but this problem as well. How can you draw people in? If you think back to those days I spent with my friends when they were talking about the sports and the financial markets, maybe if we were smart, somehow we'd get to have these, brackets where you talk about strategies for making best teachers and which one is competing well and doing the best, or brackets for agricultural improvements to get in an environmentally appropriate way the great productivity that we need there. And it might delay some things. It might delay that next baldness drug. It might delay the next financial instrument that somebody might invent. But in fact, if it meant that you got more talent, more progress on these big problems, I think that would be a great thing. Thank you. All right, now's the time for the Q&A. I guess I've got one or two questions in my pocket I'll start with, but there are microphones if people want to go up to that. I think there's one here. I think there's two in the main aisle and one over here. So I'll do one here, and then whichever mic people are at, I will call on you. This was on the university website that was submitted, and it says, to what extent did the financial crisis and lack of financial literacy in America reflect the deeper and more systemic problem of fundamentally unsustainable and short-sighted thinking in this country? What will it take to get people thinking about the long-term collective consequences of their individual actions? Well, I think in terms of the financial crisis, there's a lot of blame to go around. Certainly, the savings rate in the U.S., which turned negative during the 6 years before the crisis, you're right that there were a lot of individual decisions being made there that put the economy on an unsustainable pathway. Now, you do have to say that the government framework that had been created really encouraged that. The fact that interest on owning an expensive house was deductible. The fact that more interest rates were kept low and that mortgages are these 30-year non-recourse type tools. If there was any sector of the economy that policies really pushed high risk-taking so that if you ever had a discontinuity in house prices, something drastic was going to happen, there were literally dozens of policies that were pushing things in that direction. So a little bit you have to say there was that framework. And then I think the surprise to something like Greenspan is that all this risk that got pooled up in these securities, the private actors weren't wise enough to see that they were taking dramatic risks, partly because the credit rating went on, partly because the way they got pooled together, and just because the idea of all the housing prices dropping like that, it wasn't in the historical models, which meant they were essentially living in a fool's paradise in terms of how they thought about the correlated risk that was there. So I think, in the financial sector, there were huge mistakes. For the consumer, there were huge mistakes. This idea of financial literacy, how much should you save, things like that, that's part of it. And it's actually been good to see there's been some significant reversal of that spending behavior. Will that last? It's actually a good thing. The government's sort of two minds on these things. They don't want you to stop too abruptly because then that aggregate demand drops off too quickly. So, they know in the long run, though, that in a sense we overspent during those 6 years. And now we're playing catch up to that. So, I think your point about financial literacy is an element, but not the the main element that drove that. Let me go ahead and start on the left.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us, Mr. Gates. My question is about perpetual foundations versus lifespan foundations. So as I understand it, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation essentially has to use up all of its resources within 50 years of either you or Ms. Gates passing away. I was just curious about why you decided to set up the foundation in that way rather than having it being perpetual and keep on going like other foundations usually set up.
Well, I think being perpetual is a mistake because there are a lot of urgent problems in society today, and if you set up a foundation to focus on a very finite set of things, and you build the expertise, and you can watch over it to make sure it's pushed in the right direction, then whatever talent allowed you to accumulate the resources is used again there, and making sure that effectiveness and focus is very strong. Whatever governance structure you have after you're gone is likely to dilute that focus. And if you try and hardwire it, you won't be there to see all the changes taking place. And in the future, there will be rich people after I die. And they should be alive and direct their money to out of control robots or terrorism or whatever the problems are that day that my will won't anticipate. So I think actually, even though what we've said publicly is that 50th year, I'm quite sure we'll have the foundation spend down in a much shorter time frame than that because the problems we picked are very important and urgent. And that's my general advice to people. But if they choose to go perpetual, that's certainly absolutely their choice. I guess here in front, is there someone there?
Looking at the most influential people in recent history, either because of or despite of them not completing their education or not going, they weren't necessarily like PhDs and they were still revolutionaries in their field. Do you see the emphasis on getting a degree or just the whole general education system as hampering innovation? So if you were going to go and finish your Harvard degree, you would never have left and started Microsoft.
Yeah, I don't think dropping out is a good idea. It is true that I did go on leave. But I had this perception that, you see, there was an enabling factor for the revolution that my friend Paul Allen and I saw and wanted to help drive. And that was, we saw the software piece, but you needed the inexpensive computer, the so-called computer on a chip microprocessor. And that came out, actually, when I was in high school, but it was so limited in its power, it could do things like control a calculator or an elevator. And so my friend Paul kept saying to me as they kept improving the chip, he'd say, is it good enough? Which the acid test for that was whether I could write a basic interpreter, which would run on that machine and let you do general purpose problems. And in fact, when the 8080 comes out in 1973, when I'm actually a freshman at Harvard at the time, the chip comes out, and I had to admit to Paul, who wanted me to drop out, yes, this chip is good enough. This is better than the mini computers and about 50 times cheaper than that. And but just having the chip there wasn't it. What really precipitated my leaving school was that somebody actually came out with a kit computer using that chip. And that wasn't until basically early 1975. And so within a month of seeing the article describing this thing, I was spending night and day writing our first product, and then I left school in order to go license it to that company. So it felt like there was a very magic moment. Now, if you go back and look at it, there were software companies that got started in those. The next one after us was about a year later, and then there were a bunch in that 3-year period. we probably could have waited. I probably could have graduated, because a lot of those early software companies weren't very well run. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't want to assume that. And I would have had fun staying at Harvard. I was enjoying myself. My dad was paying for everything at the time, so I saved him a bunch of money. But unless you have something very unique like that is going to happen. I got 2.5 years of college. I'm glad I did, and now I watch these online courses. So I have completed the equivalent of some number of degrees by watching online courses. I guess in back here in this aisle, is there a microphone further back?
Yeah. So you mentioned that female literacy was something that the Gates Foundation is currently focusing on. And I wondered, in light of current philanthropists like Muhammad Yunus, who's targeting microfinance to women, and if you could kind of elaborate on the Gates Foundation's approach to gender in philanthropy and how that's affecting how we're addressing contemporary poverty.
Well, and some issues that we work on are gender neutral. For example, a malaria vaccine, a TB vaccine, an AIDS vaccine. The invention and deployment of those interventions are good for everyone. There's a number of our interventions that do end up being gender specific. What we're doing in agriculture, because the women end up doing, surprisingly to me, most of the work in African agriculture. You've got to appeal to them and understand what fits in to how they view farming practice. Likewise, reproductive health, which is a huge thing for us, because not only do you want to improve child survival, but you want to give women the tools that if they want to limit family size, they have the injection or implant or whatever approach they want. So we're very big on reproductive health, and although people have tried targeting those messages to men, that's proven to be fairly ineffective. On the financial side, the thing we've done a fair bit of investing in microfinance, but our biggest thing by far is savings, letting the poor have a way of saving instead of trying to keep the cash or buying a cow or buying jewelry, which tends to be very illiquid and have huge transaction costs and risk of loss and things like that. And there have been some really great advances on this savings piece with some of our partners. In Kenya, there's a digital money system called M-Pesa that's being used for that. There's some banks called Opportunities International as an example. It's in a number of these countries. And so the savings account, it's mostly designed for the woman because she's the one who tends to save. And so you really want, you have to design your activities somewhat gender specific. So almost all the proposals we do, there's a section that talks about, are there specific gender questions that are important in this? And I'd say about half of them there are, and almost all of those, it's about how you make sure that you're going to get in and get the women organized. When you want to get these governments to deliver what they promise, organizing the women's groups in places like Nigeria and India has turned out to be a primary tactic that's driven the government to actually execute on particularly health and education issues in an effective way. I guess over here now.
I'm a big believer in the importance of computer literacy, and I believe it has a great potential to increase general literacy as well. And currently, Microsoft has a huge, and your foundation has a huge potential to increase computer literacy worldwide in developing nations. And I believe Microsoft charges for licenses for Windows in providing computers to developing nations. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on providing computers to third world nations, because you can increase computer literacy at the same time having a huge potential to have a widely installed user base for Microsoft.
Well, Microsoft does a lot, in school systems in poor countries. They give all the software away. Mm-hmm. The biggest projects in terms of computer access were done jointly between Microsoft and the foundation. We put computers into all the libraries in a number of countries. United States, which was was that about 160,000 computers and trained the librarians, and that was incredibly successful. We did Mexico, Chile, Botswana, Latvia, Romania, and now we're doing lots of different countries. And those, we buy the hardware, we give away the software. The real expense nowadays, for anybody who's poor, they can get the software for free because it'll come through a government program where Microsoft does the donation. And even the computer itself is not the limiting factor. The 90% of the expense is either in connectivity or training the people who can help you use that. That is the human resource that's there to make it worthwhile, and the internet connection, which is still quite expensive. And there's no magic that's going to make that super free. There's some government programs that Microsoft's been involved in where you get the telecommunication provider to come in and help with that piece. Now, having said that, for the poorest countries, computer literacy is not the foundation's priority. And we prioritized basic literacy, having a school, childhood health. That's what our main thing is. So for Microsoft, on the other hand, making sure the software is freely available to anything like that is a very big priority, and that they do a lot along those lines. Okay, back to here.
Instead of having a couple or a few true friends that we can sit and engage with in in-depth conversation, some say technology has given us hundreds of friends that we never actually talk to, but just bounce hundreds of messages off of each day. Do you think technology, though clearly expanding human connections, has debilitating consequences on sincere relationships and the educational and enlightening experiences that we can gain from those?
Well, if we go back sort of pre-technology, when everybody had to farm about 16 hours a day, it wasn't a very social environment. So, to the degree that you can hang out at all, you've got to thank technology. The fact that we can, feed ourselves, have weekends off, all these things, it lets us pursue our human interests. Whenever there's been new technology, like when the book came along, there was a huge worry that people wouldn't actually go out and do things. They would just sit and read about it. And some kids like me may have read too many books when I was young. But I don't see anything that's going on today that's really, in a broad sense, in net not positive. Certainly have the stories of kids who play computer games more than they should, don't get out and exercise, don't get involved face-to-face in some ways. And parents have a role there to make sure that they try and limit that. But overall, the fact that you can Skype back to people where you come from, the fact that you can see the conditions in poor countries and feel, okay, I understand why they need this breakthrough, and I can think how to apply my scientific knowledge or my marketing knowledge to help with that particular problem. I see it as overwhelmingly positive. Certainly if you look from a governmental point of view, the openness of the information, the availability of the information has been a very pro good governance type thing. And so I overall I'm very positive on it enabling us to express our innate desire for social interaction. Here in the center.
Good evening. So I know that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has obviously been one of the most powerful organizations of its kind, and obviously has had a huge net benefit for the world. But at the same time, somewhat paradoxically, I've heard concerns raised by smaller NGOs that because of the sheer amount of resources behind the foundation, that there's almost a crowding out effect, in the sense that the foundation has monopolistic power. In this monopolistic power in the development market. And again, I mean, obviously the foundation is for the greater good. But I've heard concerns that to the effect of that smaller organizations see their funding dry up as soon as donors know that the foundation has entered that particular market. So do you think these concerns are legitimate? And if so, how does the foundation work to address them?
Well, you can look at the two areas we're in. which are global health, and you can say, since we've been in those areas, what is the trend in terms of other giving, either government, other foundation, or individual type giving in those areas? In global health, other foundation is up by a factor of 5, individual giving is up by a factor of 3, government giving is up by a factor of 2. So, it's one of our very explicit goals that when we're involved in malaria, that we do something like Nothing But Nets, which is a partnership we have with the NBA, or the partnership we have with the Lutheran Church, where they got the message out about that. They raised a lot of money. We have a partnership with Rotary on polio, where they've done just unbelievable work to increase the amount of money raised to get this polio eradication done. So it's very important that if we're in a field, is more money put into that. It is important to have the numbers in perspective. For example, on health, our foundation will spend a little under $1.8 billion a year on health. And that includes everything: AIDS, malaria, TB, buying vaccines, everything. The NIH budget is $30 billion a year. The pharma drug company R&D budgets, not including their marketing or anything, is about $50 billion a year. And those pharma, that $50 billion a year is covering rich world diseases, which is about an equal number to the poor world diseases that we're trying to cover. And so, per disease, we're pretty small. Now, we have gotten donor awareness up. U.S. government has gotten very generous on AIDS medicine and giving that out. We did a pilot project in Botswana, which is the one that the PEPFAR project got based off of, because we proved, together with our partner Merck, that in Africa you could deliver ARVs. And so that mind-blowing, incredible scale-up, totally supported by U.S. taxpayers, $5 billion a year now, was a phenomenal thing in a case of a new donor coming in. Likewise, in education, our spending on education is less than 1% of what the state of New York spends on education. So it's a very small thing, and so all we can do is fund pilot things where we'll show that, hey, a charter school is educating people very well, and the costs are actually less than are being spent in the other public schools. So I wish, our money was a high percentage of the money for education. If people think that by going into malaria and encouraging other people to go into malaria, the criticism I've heard other places, actually the opposite of what you just said, is that we get more people to do what we're doing, as opposed to get less people to do what we're doing. But anyway, the fact that people do more on malaria, I don't apologize for. I think that's a good thing. All right, next one, in back.
Hi. My question is with regards to the education reform in the United States, especially for the dropout rates that you pointed to be very high. Having attended a high school in Florida, I saw a bunch of different assessments that the state uses to measure the effectiveness of teachers. Last week, I was talking to my little brother, who is in 6th grade in Miami, and he was telling me that the state is trying to pass a new law whereby they're going to pay teachers depending on the performance of the students. So he told me that the students were worried that the teachers were going to be stressed and give them more work so that they end up doing better in the assessments. And therefore, my brother was telling me about a little sit-out that they were going to do to try to show a demonstration. Now, if we're talking about dropout rates, and there's already concern in the 6th grade that they're going to be stressed throughout their careers, I see that as a even bigger concern, and I was wondering what you thought of it. Also, I have an envelope, a letter I wanted to give you, and I was wondering what was the best way to do so.
Well, you can send it to me, or I'll have somebody come back and get it for you. In a market economy, the people who have jobs, many jobs, there's actually an expectation of performance. And that probably does create some stress. I have to go to work today. I'm supposed to stay there more than a couple hours. If the kids can't multiply, people get pissed off at me. The kid can't read. Why are they bugging me about that? So the idea of measurement in general and the fact that that creates stress, I don't think we can create a system. A system that has no stress would basically say, hey, you don't bother to come in because we are noisy kids. And if you come in this room with us, you're going to feel stress. We are noisy. We don't always obey what you say. So you've got, in most things, if you want to drive excellence, if you want to drive performance, even at the most basic level, you've got to have some measurement. And there's very few parts of the economy where you don't have some notion of what are the best practices, and you have some pressure that those best practices would spread. Now, in public schools, you don't have that. At universities, the number of applications to University of Chicago would drop off if the teachers weren't showing up and weren't feeling some stress in order to do it. Now, it's fair to say that if you design a measurement system that's capricious and is firing people who shouldn't be fired, that's very inappropriate. So the real issue in this teacher debate is that given that there hasn't been enough learning and experimentation of what a reasonable overhead, non-capricious, effective measurement system would be, you have some people who think, yes, we can do it, and some people who think, no, let's just go with a pure seniority-based system. If you're happy with the status quo in U.S. education, then the current measurement system is good. The longer you stay, the more you get paid, and that's it. We actually have 5 locations in the U.S. where we've given $400 million to, including Hillsborough in Florida, where the union, the superintendent, all the different people agreed that having a measurement system that would take the very good teachers and reward them more, that was a positive thing. So we have those 5 locations, and the dream is that 4 years from now, that if it works, that the teachers in those locations will say, we like this. We learned how to teach better, and we came here to teach better. We don't mind there being some pressure on us to teach better. We like the idea that on average we are a better set of teachers. But until you have one of those that exists, the fear of you might pick one that would be high overhead and not work well really will hold back a lot of teachers, perhaps the majority, from being willing to make that leap of faith. So that's a hope. And we'll have to convince your brother it's not a bad thing.
Thank you, Mr. Gates, so much for coming to speak with us today. My question goes back to the main message that you've tried to communicate to us in this talk, which is you said that you really think that there needs to be a broader shift of talent towards more of these kind of charitable goals and less kind of on the more selfish, like March Madness, designing the next financial instrument. But I know that one of the main arguments advanced by your good friend Warren Buffett on why he focused so much on Berkshire Hathaway and investing was that was what he did best, and that he wanted to earn as much money as possible so that when he died, he would leave the maximum amount of his contribution to the world to be able to exploit. And I'm sure likewise early in your career, you focused a lot on developing Microsoft, and it is largely because of that you have the resources available to you in order to direct resources toward these goals. So I guess my question is, why do you think that we as young people should take this? Why shouldn't we adopt a philosophy that's a little bit more selfish, like what you and Mr. Buffett formerly did? And if that's where our talents lie and that's where we'll reap the most financial success, why not focus first and foremost on that?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. I think there's 2 models, 2 ways that we're going to get more of the brightest minds focused on the important problems. One is that we'll get more people to take on these problems in their full-time work. Now, that'll be a minority. Maybe we'll get that from 3% up to 10%. And it doesn't mean just going to work for nonprofits. You can go to work in businesses that are willing to apply some of their resources to these things. In fact, some of the most innovative work is being done by large and small businesses that are focusing on these things. So that's the full-time approach, and the more people who do that, the better. And as you say, I did not do that, so those people get an A. And there's a second model, which is that you're pursuing something, and hopefully your full-time work is socially beneficial, but maybe not in the extreme that these particular problems are focused on. But in terms of your donating time, your political voice, some of your donations, and perhaps as you get later in your career and you have extra time, like I was lucky enough to do, then even more of your time being given to those things. And so if we can get from, say, 20% of people who follow that model to, say, 60% of people follow that model, that actually in absolute will be a greater impact than even the full-time piece. Per person, the full-time piece is the big win. But in Warren's case, he's decided to continue doing what he likes to do, and he's delegated the actual time in terms of who the money should go to our foundation. And I think that's an absolutely great model. I think Warren could apply himself to these problems, but he figures that he'll use this delegation thing that he's very good at in all of his work to make sure that it gets done. So it's very fair to say there are different models, and the just spend your life on these problems model won't be the path that a super high percentage will take.
Hi, Mr. Gates. I'd just like, on behalf of the kind of students and economics kind of community, I'd like to thank you for coming. I think economics is probably one of the most popular majors here. And I think a good 80% of economics majors go on to become investment bankers or consultants. And I think a small fraction of them go on to become economists, and an even smaller fraction go on to become development or health economists. And as you've said earlier, you mentioned that you've been watching a lot of kind of online lectures, and I'm sure some of them have been in the field of economics. I was just wondering which development economist or health economist or which research paper have you found to be the most kind of inspirational for the work done by the Gates, Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation?
Yeah, there's a lot of great material that has helped me. Paul Collier is a development economist at Oxford, and he wrote a book called The Bottom Billion, another one called Democracy, Votes, and Guns. In a couple months, he has one coming out called The Plundered Planet. So he's very articulate about some of the problems that the various poorest countries have, and what's happened historically and what we might do about that. I mentioned Hans Rosling, who I don't think has an economics background, but he thinks about health systems, and the stuff that he's written, I think, is very, very impactful, very good. The person who's the best on how innovation has come and changed the world is a writer called Václav Smil, who has a book called Inventing the 20th Century, Transforming the 20th Century, really explaining where innovation came in and changed our lives, and looking at how hard those things are, what's likely to happen with those things. Oh, I should have mentioned, Hans Rosling has a book. It's not just his videos. His book on global health is probably, if you're going to read one book, that's very good. The story about Paul Farmer, if you want to get just a sense of one person who really goes out and does big things, that's a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains, is one that I'd recommend to people. Almost anything that takes what's going on in these developing countries, kind of opens your mind up to what might be possible to do. And reading mainstream economists, they create frameworks that get you thinking in good ways. I met this afternoon with some of the University of Chicago economists, and we talked about this teaching problem. They had a lot of good ideas about, I don't know if we can do them, but they were thinking outside the box about incentive systems and how you bring those things in. So economists can help a lot. And even just the way that we do government accounting, they could help us understand what's really going on, what those trade-offs could look like. So if you end up in many branches of economics, you have a lot of ways to contribute to these problems.
This will be the last question.
Okay, I guess here then. Sorry.
So you've purchased Professor Feynman's physics lectures and you've made them free, which is a very good thing to do for that individual case. But how do you think we can fund putting all this free, great content out to the public as a system to set up and let it run on its own?
Well, in terms of educational content, like many things, I think it'll be a mixed model. I think there'll be for-profit stuff and charge stuff. But in terms of the most popular courses, the important courses in high school, the important courses in college, and the various interactive tests that let you see, okay, which parts of mathematics do I really get? Which things do I need to brush up on? I think that stuff just has to be free. You want, for societal benefit maximization, you want it to be used as broadly as possible. So you want just, some kid who wants to learn material sciences, can click on, there's an MIT course by Don Sadoway, which is absolutely phenomenal. You want a kid just to be able to click on that and watch it and learn. So for all the big courses, there should be lots of great free lectures. There should be competition for which of those lectures is the best, and therefore they get more money to make it even better, to make the interactive examples better, to listen to the feedback and improve the thing. So the fundamental high school and college curriculum, I think, is going to be out there as a free body of work. Now, as markets always work, if somebody can do better and wants to charge for it, that's fine. But because education is so fundamental, and because schools don't really have budgets that make it easy for them to go out and buy materials very well, it's a very inefficient process where you try and do that. I think a lot of this stuff has to be out there. Now, there are some entrepreneurs doing interesting interactive things, and I wouldn't say they shouldn't do that, but the basic lectures and a lot of interactive things, our foundation, among others, will make sure that it gets there and it's easily available. Okay, with that, I have one sort of follow-up thing or almost challenge to leave you with, which is that if you have thoughts about the broad problem of drawing people in, I'm very interested in that. Or if you have a particular problem that you have ideas, creative ideas about how to draw people in, we have the Foundation Facebook page, and you can just put some stuff up there. And I want to look those over and see, what are people thinking about, and are there things there that we could help get involved with that would really move the talent a little bit in a different direction. So thank you.
The president of the student government is now going to make a presentation to Bill Gates.
Hello, Mr. Gates. With the university's motto in mind, let knowledge grow from more to more, and so be the human life enriched. On behalf of the Student Association, I'd like to present you with a public policy BA thesis written by Sean Dixon on the topic of HIV/AIDS in China. We hope you enjoy this and read it on your way home. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Fantastic.
Well, I just wanted to thank Bill again for being with us today, and I hope that he found this day to be useful in fulfilling his pledge to his father, that one day by one day you return to college. So again, please join me again in expressing our appreciation.
Thank you. Great. Super. Thank you.